I needed to add more seating and counter space to this small kitchen. So I made a rolling breakfast bar with a locking pull-out tray. The backside has drawers for storage and a trash can. First, we'll do a quick overview of how it was constructed. It has a skeleton of 14 gauge 1-inch square tubing. I did this for strength and stiffness because the original plan called for a heavy granite top. Halfway through the project, I opted for a wood top instead. It's a bit overbuilt, but that's alright. The skeleton was then clad in wood. 3/4 inch plywood panels are fixed to the inside to give a surface to mount drawer slides and attach the plywood cladding. The solid wooden top and pull-out tray are made of Spanish cedar. The structure is then completed with salam plywood panels. I then mounted drawer slides to the insides, constructed the drawers, and then put everything together. Let's get into the details. I started out cutting 1-inch square tubing to length. Now I have this all tacked up and I'm just getting it welded. These middle pieces provide a structure to mount drawers. Rather than use a square, I cut a length of scrap to the width of my opening and then ripped it in two on the table saw to make 2 equal length spacers. I found this a lot easier to assemble in the moment, avoiding having to measure or worry about angles. I repeated the process on the other side. Now everything is upside down and we're looking at the bottom. I'm cutting pieces to make supports that the casters will be attached to. At this point, I was running kind of low on steel, so I had to improvise. On one side, I made these little 45s, and on the other side, I used a straight piece, but they both just provide a place to put the wheels. When it's all assembled, only 2 wheels will be accessible for adjustment, so the other 2 will be fixed. This wheel will be fixed so it's mounted to a spacer. Why bother with just 2 adjustable wheels? Well, this thing should come out pretty square and level, but the floor isn't always level, and being able to raise or lower one corner will eliminate wobble. My original idea was to weld the casters directly to the steel frame because I thought that would be super solid. But once I started doing the first one, I realized that that wasn't a good idea. The caster's made of very thin material and warps with the heat of the welding. Maybe there's a technique to avoid that, but what was happening to me was that I was warping the caster and starting to damage it. Yeah, look at all this slop. So I decided that I didn't want to continue with that. I'm just going to attach some screws, starting with this one that's half welded. So far the wheels have held up really well. It's been in use for 6 months and I haven't had to change any wheels out. This piece has a hole in it. just because it's a piece of scrap from something else. But that hole really has no purpose for this project. Now I'm going to start making the adjustable wheel. I'm starting out with a small pilot hole before running a bigger bit to make a hole for the bolt to pass through. And it's a pretty good fit. Now we're going to go over to the other side and do the same thing. Remember, this support looks different, but it really makes no difference. The wheel will be positioned the same distance from the corner of the frame. When using large drill bits, you can get a pretty nasty kick, especially when you're drilling through steel and it catches. If it does catch, your drill body spins in the opposite direction that your bit is rotating. So in that case, it would be counterclockwise. So I like to put the drill in my left hand and brace it against my body if I think there's a risk it might catch. I'm going to insert these bolts and weld the nuts to the frame. Later, the wheels will attach to the bolts and they will adjust up and down by turning the bolt. Now I'm going to tack the nuts on both sides and remove the bolts before continuing to weld. These are actually lock nuts with nylon collars inside. The nylon melted with the heat of the welding, so I wouldn't use these for this application in the future. I pretty much just turned them into regular nuts by burning out all the nylon. These little rectangular pieces are what the casters are going to screw into. Then the bolts will be welded to the square pieces. I'm using a small piece of square tubing and the ground clamp to make a tiny work stand. It's important to mention that nuts and bolts are usually galvanized or zinc coated. The fumes released when burning these coatings are harmful to breathe, so if you don't want 7 kinds of cancer, it needs to be done carefully in a well-ventilated area. Also, you should probably wear gloves while you're welding and don't wear flip-flops. The frame is being cleaned with thinner to prepare for painting. I'm just going to paint it with black spray paint. This frame will be completely covered with wood, so the only reason I'm painting it is for a little rust prevention. Now I'm screwing in the remaining wheels. I don't have the right attachment for my drill, but I got tired of using the hand tool. After struggling for a while, I just put this little socket inside my drill. It's not the right way to use it, but it got the job done quickly. Now you can see the wheels and how they work a little bit more clearly. When the wheels turn, they move up and down. We've got these screws sticking out that I'm going to chop off later so they don't chop off someone's hand. These 3/4 inch plywood panels are being screwed to the inside of the frame. The screws are run into the wood through holes in the steel. Around the edge of the plywood, I have pocket holes pre-drilled that will be used to attach the face frame and front piece later. I'm going to cut some 3/4 inch salam plywood down to make the drawers. Salam is a hardwood common to Mexico and Central America that has a similar hardness to white oak. I'm going to use a straight edge with a circular saw to make these cuts. I use this scrap piece of wood as a spacer, and that scrap piece of wood is cut to the exact width of the distance between the saw blade and the base. So I line up that scrap piece on the line, set my straight edge, and then I take it off. I'm cutting some 5mm plywood to make a drawer bottom. And there it is. I need to make a groove in each of these sides that will accept the bottom panel. In this case, I'm going to set my table saw blade at 5mm high, 5mm away from the fence. I'm going to run each piece through. Then I'm going to slightly adjust my fence, make another pass, and continue like this, making the groove slightly bigger until the panel fits perfectly. Looks like it's not quite there. And there it is, good enough for me. I'm going to use pocket hole screws and wood glue to put this together. I like the pocket hole screws because they're fast, they're strong, and they will be invisible if you put your drawers together correctly. This jig I'm using is the Kreg K4 jig. When you go to drive your pocket hole screws, if you have your drill set at full speed, you're probably going to blast through your material. So you need to turn the torque down on your drill by adjusting your clutch. I set mine to 3 as a starting point, and I adjust up or down depending on the material. Damp rag for glue squeeze out, some tape, 1 1/4 screws, and Old Spice, which is actually glue, and these clamps. Whenever you're using pocket hole screws, one issue is that when you're driving the screws, they go in at an angle and they can kind of push your work pieces around and they come out of alignment. So they need to be firmly clamped. You can use regular clamps, but it's difficult, and these clamps really make it a lot easier. I probably wouldn't like using pocket hole screws without these clamps. I think they're indispensable. I bought Miles Craft clamps because they were the cheapest ones I could find on Amazon. There's a lot of other brands, but they work great and they fit just fine with the holes that the Kreg jig makes. Now I'm putting together another drawer. This drawer is going to have a 3/4 inch plywood bottom because it's going to hold pots and pans and some other heavy things. Here I am doing some edge banding. I just put it on and trim it with a razor. This is a clear spray enamel that goes for about $2.50 a can where I live. And I just use it where I can get away with it, really. I probably wouldn't use it on a tabletop or a drawer front or something that would be high wear, but I really have never had any problems with it. Now I'm back at the shop. I'm picking out some Spanish cedar for my tabletop and for the pull-out tray. I run it through the table saw, the joiner, and the planer. Now I'm going to rub everything down in Old Spice. Just imagine the smell of Old Spice and Spanish cedar. It's invigorating. But I'm just going to use glue, no screws or biscuits or dominoes or anything. Should hold together just fine. I'm also going to use some cauls to keep everything flat. Now, a day later, I'm taking it all apart again, and it looks like it all came out good enough. Then I'm going to use the same process for the tray. Now I have rough panels that I'm going to sand first with 80 grit. Then 120, and then 220. Check out all these mosquitoes in my shop. They're pretty crazy. Now I'm going to trim these panels to their final size. Here I'm going to show the spacer I use for my circular saw in a little more detail. It's just a scrap piece of wood, the same width as the distance from the blade to the base of the saw. Then I just line it up on the cut line and remove it. When I run the saw along the straight edge, it cuts right on the line. Now I'm cutting some small skinny pieces for the skirting of the tabletop and for the sides of the tray. I'm going to glue these on, and I'm also going to screw the crap out of them because my panels have bowed a little bit and maybe I can force them straight. By the way, these are some special woodworking screws that cost a fortune. No, they're actually just drywall screws. Some people will say that's not cool, but I've always used them. I've never had any problems. The other screws I've tried I didn't really like. I'm smoothing these edges over a little bit, just putting a little 45 on it. I like to do this with a sander rather than a router bit because it looks a little more natural and less machine made. It's kind of like a handmade touch. I'm painting this tabletop with polyurethane. I'm brushing on the first coat to get it nice and thick. After that, I'm going to sand it smooth and spray more layers. I'm installing the drawer slides, and my drawers have to ride above these bolts or they're going to hit them. I'm going to use this scrap piece of wood that's cut to 5 centimeters as a spacer and also to hold my drawer slides as I install them. Here's another fancy woodworking tool. It's actually a 3-inch drywall screw that I'm going to be using as a punch. I hold the drawer slide in place and I punch out each of the holes I'm going to drive a screw into. That way when I run my screws in, everything stays perfectly lined up. Again, I have the clutch on the drill set to 3 or 4 so I don't strip out the wood when I drive the screws. Then I take the same 5 centimeter spacer and use it to install the drawer slide on the opposite side so that the drawer slides are installed at the same level. These little T-squares are pretty handy for doing drawers. And on the left side, I'm using a scrap of wood to keep the drawer slide lined up with the front of the drawer. Now I have the next drawer propped up on some scrap wood so I can see exactly where I want it. I'm going to make a mark on the frame and on the drawer. Now I have to pull the bottom drawer out to continue. Now I'll take the distance from the lower drawer slide to the mark that I made and cut a piece of scrap wood to the same length. And I'll actually need 2 identical scraps, so I'm going to cut them both at the same time. Now I'll use those pieces as spacers to install the next set of drawer slides. I completed the other 2 drawers the same way. To install the slides for the pull-out tray, I'm going to reference from the top using the same 5cm piece of wood. This time I actually need 5.5 centimeters of space for the tray to clear, so I'm going to make up the difference with my T-square, which is 0.5 centimeter thick, to avoid having to cut a whole new piece. So now my line will be 5.5 centimeters from the top. And here's where I realized that I made my tray just a few millimeters too small, so it's not going in. So luckily, once I realized what the problem was, all I needed to do was move these screws from one hole to the other on those tabs. If you screw into those tabs, it gives your drawer slides more play and wiggle room. So it actually allows the slide to pull away from the carcass, which compensates for when your drawer is too small, or in this case, tray. I'm going to give it a little bit of help here with a screwdriver. Just pry that slide out just a hair. Now it goes right in. The cool thing about these slides is that they lock in the out position, so your tray won't slide in while you're using it. Now I'm going to cut some thin strips of wood to make the face frame. It will be joined with pocket hole screws again. I need to clamp this up as I'm joining it, but the clamps I used before aren't really that great for this application. In this case, I'm going to clamp both pieces to a third piece of scrap wood. It's going to keep everything flush and the 2 pieces won't move around as they're being joined together. I edge banded all of it. Installing a face frame is another place where pocket hole screws really shine, and the 90-degree pocket hole clamps work great for this as well. This way you don't have to drive any nails or screws through the face frame, and at the end everything's invisible. I'm preparing some long, thin strips of plywood for the slats on this front piece. I'm going to put the edge banding on before and then cut a bunch of smaller pieces to length. I need to cut 15 equal length pieces for the slats, and the pieces are longer than my fence, so I can't do a traditional stop block. So instead, I'm just going to grab my other saw and scoot it close and use that as a stop block. So every time I go to cut a piece, it's going to butt up against the other saw and it will be lined up to the perfect length. Before continuing, I'm going to drill pocket holes in both ends of each of these pieces. This frame will accept the slats. Now I just need to determine the spacing between each slat. The width of this opening is at 121.8 centimeters, and the width of each slat is 4.75 centimeters. I need to figure out how much space all the slats take up together and subtract that from the amount of space I have in the opening, and that will give me the amount of empty space. There's 15 slats, so I'll have 16 spaces. I'll take the amount of empty space divided by 16, and that will give me 3.19, which rounds to 3.2. Now I'm going to cut a handful of spacers that measure 3.2 centimeters on the miter saw. In this case, the pieces are small enough that I can use a traditional stop block setup where I just clamp a piece of scrap wood to the fence. It's hard to see in the video because it's sped up, but when making these cuts, I let the blade stop before I lift it back up because these little pieces are now in a bind between the saw blade and the stop block. So if I lift the blade up while it's still spinning, they go shooting out the back. I'm going to install my first slat exactly in the middle and then work my way out from there using the spacers. I'm just going to screw all these slats in. I'm not going to glue them because afterwards this whole thing is going to be glued to another piece of wood. Again, the clamps are essential for alignment. Now let's go back in time to when I cut this 5mm sheet of plywood down to make the backing piece. This is going to be attached with glue and nails. My front piece is slightly wider than a regular piece of plywood, and I wanted to keep this vertical grain orientation, so I cut a little piece to complete it and hid the seam behind one of the slats. Now I'm cutting the drawer faces from a single sheet of plywood to give it a seamless look. Here's how they'll be arranged when they're mounted up. These side pieces have an angled trapezoid shape. I'm going to explain how I cut them without measuring any angles or doing any math. So here's the island. The side measures 40 centimeters wide. The narrow part of my trapezoid is at the top, so I know my top is going to measure 40, and at the bottom it's going to flare out. Then I just got a tape measure, I eyeballed it, and I decided that I wanted my bottom to be about 80. So you'll end up with a trapezoid that measures 40 on the top and 80 on the bottom. This rectangle represents a piece of plywood. It's 100 centimeters wide. The height of my island is 70, so my plywood is pre-cut to 70 centimeters tall. Now I'm going to take 100 minus 80, which will give me 20. And that's how much I need to remove from the bottom to get to 80 centimeters. But I'm going to take it from each side to keep everything lined up. So 20 divided by 2 is 10. So I'm going to remove 10 centimeters from each side. I'm going to draw a mark 10 centimeters out from each corner. Now 40 at the top, I'm going to do 100 minus 40, which is 60. Now again, to get things centered up, I'm going to divide 60 by 2, which is 30. So I need to remove 30 centimeters from each side. I'm going to measure 30 centimeters from each corner and make a mark. Now I'll take a straight edge and draw a line to connect the marks. Then I'll cut along this line with my circular saw and a straight edge. Here I am doing the final cut. I have one angle cut already on the far side. Now I'm just doing the last one. So I'm going to check it out. So I'll measure the top, measure the bottom, everything looks good. Now I'm going to attach the drawer faces to the drawers themselves. But first I'm going to play a little card game. No, not really. Now what I'm going to do is see how many cards I can stuff into this gap right here. I'm going to use these cards as spacers, as shims. So now I have 3 gaps vertically here. So I'm going to divide the number of cards I could fit into that gap by the number of spaces to get an even gap all the way around. And I'm going to do the same thing side to side, and with the other 2 drawers on the other side, do the same process. I'm going to glue these drawers, and as the glue is setting, I'm going to insert the cards to get the spacing correct. I actually started running out of cards, so I grabbed some pieces of cardboard, and they worked just as well as cards for shims. Now the glue is dry. I'm just checking out the fit on everything. Now I'm going to pull all the drawers out and flip this thing upside down because I'm going to install the front piece. I'm going to hold it on with clamps as I connect it with pocket hole screws. I had these pocket holes pre-drilled back at the start of the project. Also, to the pull-out tray, I need to attach what is essentially a drawer face. I'm going to do the same process with glue and the cards. Only in this case, because it's so long from side to side, I'm going to clamp it down as well, just to make sure I get good contact between both of the pieces as the glue is setting. Now I'm going to attach the angled side pieces. I'm going to clamp them in place and drive screws through from the other side. Then I finished everything with a spray-on polyurethane with a satin finish, and that's it.